Hello and welcome. I'm JP Miller of the Empire Report, and we are thrilled to host this forum on fighting high prescription drug prices in New York, an issue important to New Yorkers of all ages, and especially to New Yorkers 50 and older. I want to thank AARP New York for sponsoring this forum. Thank you especially to Spectrum News Inside City Hall anchor Errol Louis for moderating the important discussion, and thank you to the elected officials and panelists for participating. Here to open our discussion is AARP New York's David McNally. David, take it away.
Thank you, Jay.
Hello.
Empire Report for hosting the vodcast on one of the major issues of our time, the high costs of prescription drugs. Older Americans and older New Yorkers typically rely on prescription drugs more than younger adults, and our population is aging fast. A recent Center for Urban Future report said there are more people over 65 in New York than under 15. That makes tackling the high cost of prescription drugs more important than ever. Americans pay 3 times as much as other countries for the exact same drugs. AARP helped beat the big drug companies in Washington, D.C. last year with a new federal law that lets Medicare negotiate drug prices, caps the out-of-pocket cost for Medicare beneficiaries' insulin at $35, and caps their total out-of-pocket costs for prescription drugs at $2,000 a year. But there's more that can be done both at the federal and the state level. There's no silver bullet, but there's a lot of great actions we can take here in New York. And some of them have been proposed by Governor Hochul. She has proposed cutting-edge prescription drug price provisions in her state budget that would increase transparency around proposed price hikes and practices that delay consumers from accessing cheaper generic drugs. But the state legislature, of course, must agree to these proposals for them to be included in the final state budget due on April 1st. And as I am sure you're about to hear, there is pushback from the prescription drug industry. We got what we needed from the national campaign on Medicare, and now we have to get what we need here in New York in this budget. You can ask your state legislators to support the governor's transparency proposals by going to this website, aarp.org/FairRxPricesNY. That's aarp.org/FairRxPricesNY. A special thanks to our legislative sponsors of transparency provisions, Senator Fernandez and Assemblymember Gallagher, for participating in today's forum, along with Blair Horner of the New York Public Interest Research Group, and our own Bill Ferris from AARP New York, and of course, Errol from Spectrum News. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our stellar moderator, Errol Louis, and our panelists for what I'm sure will be an enlightening and certainly important discussion today.
All right. Thanks very much, David. I'm very glad to be here, and I thank AARP and JP Miller for inviting me back. I am a member of AARP, so this is of more than academic interest to me. I'm going to introduce our panelists briefly, and then we'll start right in on the questions and conversation. Joining us today, we have State Senator Natalia Fernandez, who represents the 34th District in the State Senate, which includes parts of the North Bronx and Southern Westchester. Also with us is Assemblymember Emily Gallagher. She represents the 50th District based in Brooklyn, which includes all or part of Greenpoint, Williamsburg, and South Williamsburg. Blair Horner is the Executive Director of the New York Public Interest Research Group, and we'll be talking with him as well. And of course, Bill Ferris, who is the New York State Legislative Representative of AARP. Bill, let me start with you. The Governor Hochul, has put a proposal on the table that really got a lot of the action started in this session. What is the governor proposing, and how would it help New Yorkers who rely on prescription medication?
Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you for being a member of AARP. So first, the governor is proposing a pay-to-delay transparency language, and I know we have the sponsors of that legislation with us today, Senator Fernandez and Assemblywoman Gallagher. But so I'll spend a little time on the the reporting of price increases. So the governor wants to have drug companies who sell their drugs in New York to report to the Department of Financial Services how much they're increasing their drug and what the increase will be, the reason why they're increasing the cost of their drug, and when this increase will take effect. And we believe that's an excellent provision that the governor is trying to pass through and put into law in New York. And what it really will do is have a downward effect on the cost of prescription drugs. There's about 26 states in the country that have done similar laws and have seen the results. And the results are that drug companies don't come in and increase their prices of drugs in the various programs they sell to, obviously the Medicaid program here in New York and other programs. So what the governor is trying to do, and we agree, is to bring transparency to price and get further knowledge of why that price is going up and actually report it to the Department of Financial Services. And why this is important is because we all pay for prescription drugs as consumers, individual consumers, as well as taxpayers, as I said, for the Medicaid program. So when we get a so-called heads up, we can plan accordingly when drug prices go up. So there's a quick and dirty of what the governor's trying to do on the price transparency. The pay to delay is a just as big issue, and I'll defer to the senator and the assemblywoman to talk about that. And ARP has some statistics about the impact of that as well.
Okay, thank you, Bill. I want to ask you, Senator Fernandez, what are you hearing, first of all, from your constituents about prescription costs, and what made you decide to sponsor this legislation? Oh, no, I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Yes, we're good now.
I'm not hearing her. We'll let the technical people work on that. I think we've got a frozen screen. Let me ask you, Assemblywoman, same question. What are you hearing from your constituents about affordability of prescription drugs, and how did that lead you to this legislation?
Sure. We are really concerned about the increased cost of living, and prescription drug prices have long been a problem for our constituents, especially those who are on a fixed income. So to find out that there was this whole program of pay to delay going on between pharmaceutical industry, bigwigs, and generic brands, it really seemed like a good place to insert New York state law. So I'm very much looking forward to having the accountability that this bill will provide.
And the whole notion of pay to delay, a company paying to make sure that generic brands don't come onto the market. Is this something that the legislature has dealt with or talked about much before? How new is this issue?
Well, to jump in there, so the state of California actually tried to ban this practice of when a brand name drug company cuts a deal with a generic company to keep their generic drug off the marketplace. And California tried to do that. They passed a law banning it, but it got caught up in federal court, and it was found that it violated the Interstate Commerce Clause and the powers of Congress. So what the governor's doing, and Senator Fernandez and Assemblywoman Gallagher, what they're basically saying is, with the legislation, we can't ban it unless Congress passes a law. So what we can do in the state is have the drug companies report these deals to the Department of Financial Services. And the problem with this practice, and it's hard to believe it's actually legal in this country, is that it keeps generic drugs off the marketplace on average for 17 months. So you can imagine the Medicaid program in New York, which I believe is billions, I think close to $9 billion in spending, that in that $9 billion, as well as individual consumers, we're paying a higher price for a drug when there's a generic drug available. It just doesn't make sense. It's not conducive for access to affordable drugs. And if it doesn't get banned by Congress, we believe the senator and the assemblywoman and the governor are doing the best they can to bring the reporting of these deals at minimum.
Okay, let me check in with Senator Fernandez and make sure we've, I hope, gotten our technical fix. Give me a thumbs up or just start talking if you can hear me. Okay, we'll let our tech folks keep working on that. Blair, what is the legislative process going to look like? And I guess to drag it out in the open, what is the pharmaceutical industry likely to do or already doing to try and kill this legislation?
Well, you sort of, can you hear me, by the way? Just make sure that my
Yes.
technology is working. All right, perfect. Thank you, Errol and AARP and JP and others and the Senate, Assemblywoman. The reason why the United States has such a complex system of healthcare, in addition to prescription drug prices, is because the power of interest groups. And Albany is well known for having powerful interest groups that spend big bucks on lobbying firms and shower lawmakers and political committees with campaign contributions. And so they'll be flexing their muscle to drive the best deal that they can for themselves. And taking on the pharmaceutical industry in New York is no laughing matter. They're going to be spending a lot of time to sort of, I assume, to try to pull this out of the budget process, because the governor's proposal right now is in the budget. And that's going to be wrapped up in the next few weeks. So the battle for this legislation hits a critical point starting next week when both houses of the legislature advance their one-house budget bills, and whether or not they include this will be, I think, a key test.
Blair, what's your take on the question that Bill Ferris raised about outright banning pay-for-delay deals?
Well, I mean, Bill answered that sort of in the sense that California did it, and the state, the court said that the state can't do that. And so the legislation is to shine a spotlight on the practice under the theory that the more attention is drawn to these arrangements, these kickback arrangements, where brand name prescription drug companies offer a financial incentive, shall we say, to generic companies to keep a generic equivalent off the market, is a way for them to continue to make money on the medicine. Again, medicines are critically important to all of us from a consumer perspective, but about a quarter of all Americans right now are having a hard time paying for their prescription drugs because of the exorbitant prices. So the kinds of proposals we're talking about today are things that the state can do to help curb some of the excessive prices that New Yorkers have to face, either individually, through their employer, or through state-sponsored programs.
Assemblywoman and Senator, if you can get in on this, I'd love to hear and let our listeners hear exactly how this works. I mean, we often talk about outside interests, sort of exerting influence over the legislative process. What from the inside, how does that feel? How's it likely to play out? What do you intend to do? What can we expect in the next few weeks?
Great. Natalia, do you want to, or sorry, Senator Fernandez, would you like to attempt to answer? Okay. I'll,
My turn.
What we tend to see is,
I'm so delayed.
what we tend to see are just, a lot of what these big corporations do, regardless if it's big pharma or, the gas and oil industry or even real estate, is they tend to come up with some talking points that are provably false and come at our colleagues and at ourselves with these, sometimes even getting constituents to call us with these concerns. And it can feel very disempowering because all of these issues are so emotional, especially when we're talking about our own healthcare and our ability to survive financially and physically. It is very difficult to remove the emotion from that conversation. So often what we'll end up seeing are people coming and getting upset about something that is provably false. And then we have to go in and try to check it. And what often ends up happening is folks are confused about what the true issue is. So we end up seeing so often just disinformation campaigns happening with these kind of bills. So what we're hoping with this bill is that there has been enough attention on the federal deals with the Inflation Reduction Act, and also just that AARP and so many other advocacy groups have done such a good job with the information around this, that this won't work. Misinformation won't work. And so hopefully we can get it through the budget. I do think there are some things that are superior in our bill that would be better for holding accountability. But I will be thrilled if this ends up in the budget. And I think it will.
Okay, Blair, how do you expect this to? Oh, wait, I think we have a better, looks like a visibly better connection for Senator Fernandez. What, are you using your phone now?
Yes, I had to just jump to the phone. Sorry about that.
Yes,
Worst
phones
thing
are.
next time.
Anyway, yeah, let's hear from you. I'd love to hear from you about how you got into this issue, what you've heard from constituents, for example, and how you expect the rest of the process to play out.
Yes, thank you. To your first question from the beginning of the show. So this issue is very serious in my district. My parts of the Bronx, from even my time in the Assembly to now in the Senate, are naturally occurring retiring communities. So we have a lot of seniors in my area, as well as all over the state. We know that our senior community is growing exponentially and faster than ever. So this is a really dire concern. Many people have their prescription drugs, and the cost is literally driving them out of their homes sometimes, because the choice of whether paying rent or buying groceries or getting your drugs has really come to a breaking point. So I am very happy that the governor is seeing this, is trying to make the right attempts to build transparency and to keep the market fair for our consumers and our seniors. But for what I heard of Assemblymember Gallagher, it could go a little further. Our bill is a little stronger, and we hope that language can be added to what she has. But again, a great first step. I'm very happy that she's, addressing it in this budget, and I'd be happy too. But we could go further, because the pay to delay model, I don't think is good at all. So I have another bill, and Emily, I was going to ask you to be my partner on it.
Oh, I accept.
Yes, but this bill is S4513, and the purpose is to preserve access to affordable prescription drugs by somewhat banning the pay to delay practice. So right now, it's okay that the big name companies can try to argue to see who is going to get their drugs out versus the generic brands. But this is now building a case that we shouldn't have to do that. People should have the option to get the cheaper generic brand over the pricier common brand. So I hope that's the next step that we take into this fight with pricey drugs, because lives are depending on it. And again, we're reaching a tipping point that I think is going to be detrimental if we don't act now this year and as soon as the budget's over.
And so, Senator, while a lot of the final negotiations after the One House bills are done in the final weeks, it tends to go behind closed doors with your leadership negotiating directly with the governor and with her counterpart in the Assembly. But we know that the pharmaceutical industry will not be absent, that they will be making their presence known and their pressure felt. How do you plan to deal with that?
Well, no surprise. I think all of us are expecting them to push back, as they've been for years in this argument. So I think that we are, again, in a stronger position. I'm very proud of the circle of colleagues that I have in both majority houses. And I think that because of the time that we've been constantly pushing on this, everyone is ready to see this type of change happen. And they're just going to have to deal with it.
Mm. And from Bill, from your point of view, what's the best way for viewers or anyone else watching this to overcome the opposition if they want to get involved in this fight?
Well, I would say to contact their elected official. I know David gave a website to be involved in ARP's campaign, but the power of, from speaking for ARP, the power of ARP has always been its membership. And what we do when we're in a big fight, as ARP was in Washington to get the changes in Medicare done, is really get our membership involved, get our membership to contact their elected officials and tell them how important this issue is. And we are in the process of doing that. And we hope, and usually it is the case with the senator and assemblywoman's colleagues, that when they hear from their constituents, the people in their communities, that they're having problems with a certain issue, in this instance, the high cost of prescription drugs, that will push the industry opposition to the side. And we will hope that will happen. And that's what ARP recommends people do, get in touch with their elected officials. But I wanted to touch on something that the senator said about hearing from her constituents. ARP surveys our membership all the time, and we have teletown halls. We talk to our membership. And the one thing we found, which was somewhat disturbing, is that the number one reason an individual doesn't fill a prescription or delays taking their prescription or skipping a dose is because of cost. So, Senator, we're hearing the same things. Assemblywoman, we're hearing the same things. That stat in and of itself drives ARP, and we hope it drives our membership to get better policy here at the state level. So that's what we're hoping to do. And you know, it's the power of the constituencies of the elected officials that, through my experience, carries the day.
I think the power of persistency too. Sorry to just add on that persistency, because we hear it and we say it every year, but it needs to be an everyday contact that we make, that we still want to see this done. We're not going to let up until we see you address it. So for everybody watching, my colleagues and everyone here, stay persistent and keep making those phone calls, because the power in people and the power in numbers is, I think, the greatest power of all.
You know, Bill, it's normally thought of as a federal issue, but since, you know, we do share a border with Canada, is the issue of importing lower cost drugs from Canada something that is or maybe should be pursued?
Well, there's legislation. Actually, the Senate passed a bill on that issue, and there's a bill introduced in the Assembly. And other states have passed and put into their law to do importation from Canada. And the prices in Canada are 3-4 times cheaper, or the prices in the United States are higher, 3 or 4 times higher than if you purchase the exact same drug in Canada. But the problem right now is when the states pass these laws, it has to be approved by the federal government. And Vermont passed it, Florida, a couple other states out west have passed importation laws, but the federal government really has not approved these plans yet. So that's a major stumbling block for RX importation. But there's a way around that, in the sense of, why don't we just take the price lists that the provinces in Canada use and use them to price our drugs here in New York? And Senator Clear, a colleague of Senator Fernandez, has a bill just to do that. So we're looking at that as a possible solution to look at the high cost of prescription drugs. But right now, in the season we're in, the senator's bill, the assemblywoman's bill, is on the table with the governor's proposals, and it's going to be an interesting four weeks ahead of us on this issue.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess finally, Blair, this is, you know, from the outside, the way we've been reporting it, and you've seen many sessions come and go, but the way we've been reporting on so many different issues is that with supermajorities in the Assembly and the Senate, and the governor belonging to the same party, and all of them promising and swearing that they all get along and are willing to work together, is this a foregone conclusion?
Well, I mean, it takes 3 to tango when it comes to the budget, right? And so you have now legislation in both houses, obviously aggressive sponsors, which is really quite important to getting legislation done. The governor putting it in the budget puts it on the table. That's why I think it'll be interesting to see what the houses do. If they put the governor's language in, or substitute the legislation advanced by Assemblywoman Gallagher and Senator Fernandez, that means, you know, we're in pretty good shape. And Bill's point about grassroots pressure is absolutely right on. The only way you beat organized money is with organized people. And that's what we're hoping that this event and all the advocacy can get done. But certainly it's more likely to get done if it's in the one house budget bills. But there's also that guy named Hector LaSalle, which shows that just because they're all in the same party doesn't mean everything works out right.
Yeah, that's always the challenge, right? Everything gets traded for everything else. So there'll be, MTA subsidies and, zoning rules and everything else might get thrown in the same hopper. Well, we're going to draw this part of the conversation to a close. I want to thank you for an informative discussion. And I know you all will be out there beating the bushes and informing members and keeping this conversation going. And I look forward to talking with you all some more in the future. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was great. Thank you so much to Arrow Lewis for moderating. Thank you to the elected officials and panelists for participating. And especially thank you to AARP New York for sponsoring this important forum. For more information, please check out aarp.org and empirereportnewyork.com. Thank you again.